Free, finally free of you! The millionaire widow, Mrs. Ilara, spat the words, rancor corroding her soul as she hurled the basket with the newborn twins into the darkness of the forest. The desperate cries of the children tore through the silence of the cold and merciless night, but Ilara only sped up the car, her heart a block of ice. Little did she know that, among the dancing shadows of the ancient trees, a pair of electric blue eyes, belonging to a majestic and legendary albino tiger, was already observing the scene with an ancient intelligence. And what he would do next would defy all human logic and the cruel fate Ilara had orchestrated. The distant roar of Ilara's car engine faded into the vastness of the forest, carrying with it the echo of cruelty and leaving behind only the faint and intermittent crying of the newborns. For the albino tiger, known among legends as the guardian of shadows, each whimper was a strange pang in his wild chest. His electric blue eyes carried the wisdom of ages, and his white coat was a cloak of mystery. He observed the forest with majestic indifference, but the fragility of those sounds was something new, awakening a long-dormant instinct different from hunger or territorial defense. With silent steps, the tiger moved towards the lament. The night was a heavy veil, and the cold air promised a merciless dawn. He approached the basket, his imposing body casting a gigantic shadow. Inside, huddled together, were the two babies, their small faces red and wrinkled from cold and despair. Their tiny fists flailed, and the crying intensified upon sensing the immense presence. The tiger lowered his head, his large snout hovering delicately over the edge of the basket. The smell of milk and innocence, mixed with tears, was intoxicating and confusing. He had never encountered such defenseless creatures. His wild instincts screamed for him to retreat, for nature to take its course, but something in their closed eyes and little mouths open in supplication touched a deep chord in his ancient soul. It was not weakness, but a compassion he never imagined possessing. It was the call of life, crying out for protection. With a careful movement, the tiger used his snout to push the basket, dragging it to a sheltered nook beneath the dense canopy of a centuries-old oak. The ground there was covered with moss and leaves, offering a softer bed, insulated from the cold. He lay down, his massive body forming a barrier against the wind. One of the babies, feeling the sudden warmth, stopped crying, opening their small blue eyes. They fixed on the tiger's electric blue eyes, a mutual recognition of a connection that transcended logic and species. The forest, which Mrs. Ilara had imagined as the end, was beginning to transform into a sanctuary. The tiger, the legendary guardian of shadows, was not just a predator. He was now the guardian of two tiny lives, an unlikely mother whose ferocity would turn not to hunting but to the purest and most unconditional protection. His eyes, once distant, now reflected a surprising tenderness, a silent commitment. The night was still long and dangerous, but under the albino tiger's watchful eye, the twins were safe. Ilara's greed and bitterness had cast the children into danger, but the altruism and unexpected connection of a wild animal were rewriting destiny, proving that love and kindness can blossom in the most improbable places. Mrs. Ilara, in turn, drove back to her opulent mansion. A cold, satisfied smile played on her lips. She felt immense relief, as if an unbearable weight had been lifted from her shoulders. In her mind, the twins were a distant memory, a problem solved by nature's merciless hand. She did not imagine that at that exact moment, nature was acting in a way that would defy all her expectations and unveil the deeper truth about the power of love and life. Mrs. Ilara arrived at her mansion, a marble and glass palace that seemed even grander under the pale moonlight. The door closed with a soft click, sealing off the outside world, and with it any trace of guilt or remorse. She ascended the imposing staircase, her steps echoing in the silence that was once filled with laughter and conversations, but which she now preferred empty. In her room, with silk-lined walls and a king-size bed, Ilara lay down, feeling the weight of years of loneliness and bitterness dissipate, replaced by a strange lightness. "Problem solved," she murmured to the ornate ceiling, convinced that the forest had forever swallowed what she considered a stain on her existence. The image of the twins' small faces was already fading from her memory, as if they had never existed. While Ilara slept in her cold luxury, the forest began to awaken under a cloak of mist. The guardian of shadows remained vigilant, his massive body serving as a shield against the cold that still stubbornly lingered. The twins, snuggled in the basket, felt the warmth emanating from the great feline, a warmth that was life. The shy sun began to filter through the leaves, painting the ground with gold and shadow. One of the babies let out a faint whimper, and soon the other followed, both awakening with the hunger every newborn feels. The crying, now stronger and more insistent, was a sound entirely new to the tiger. He did not understand the need, but he felt the urgency. His electric blue eyes, once focused on protection against predators, now showed an almost human confusion. The tiger delicately licked one of the baby's tiny hands, an instinctive gesture of comfort he would use with his own cubs, but he soon realized it was not enough. The crying intensified, and the little mouths opened and closed in search of something he could not offer. The forest, his home, was rich in life, but not in mother's milk. A restlessness grew in the majestic animal's chest. He stood up, pacing in short circles around the basket, his wild mind working on a problem that transcended his experience. What to do? The protective instinct was overwhelming, but the inability to provide for the human cub's most basic need was agonizing. With a soft roar, almost a purr, the tiger nudged the basket with his snout as if wanting to move the babies somewhere their needs could be met. But where? The forest was dangerous for such fragile creatures. He lay down again, offering his body as a refuge, hoping that the warmth and proximity might calm their despair. And, for a brief moment, the crying subsided, turning into sporadic sobs, as the babies snuggled closer to the soft, warm fur. Far away in the mansion, Ilara woke up refreshed. She went down for breakfast, served on fine china, and leafed through a business newspaper, feeling like the mistress of her own destiny. The absence of the twins was not a void, but a space filled with newfound freedom, or so she believed. She planned her day with a schedule of social and financial commitments, without a single crack for compassion. Little did she know that, hundreds of kilometers away, the forest had not fulfilled her expectation of eternal silence, but was weaving a new and improbable tapestry of love and resilience, where life, in its purest and most vulnerable form, was being fiercely defended by a wild heart Ilara could never comprehend or corrupt. Nature, indeed, was acting, but in a way the millionaire could never foresee. The twins' crying echoed through the clearing, a sharp sound that pierced the heart of the guardian of shadows. That primordial instinct to protect, which had led him to take them in, now transformed into a palpable anguish. He licked their small, damp faces, tried to push the basket with his snout, as if he could magically conjure the nourishment they so desperately cried for. His electric blue eyes, once so serene, now reflected a deep concern. He knew how to hunt, how to defend, but nurturing those fragile lives, so different from his own cubs, was a challenge his ancient wisdom could not decipher. The sun rose, and with it the certainty that time was a cruel enemy. The baby's hunger did not diminish. On the contrary, it seemed to grow with each passing minute, and their small forms began to tremble with exhaustion. He stood up, his imposing body moving with surprising agility for its size. He walked around the basket, sniffing the air, as if seeking an answer in the forest's scents. There was no milk, no human warmth, only the smell of earth, leaves, and the growing despair of the little ones. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Mrs. Ilara was enjoying a warm bath, immersed in fragrant bubbles. The warm water and the scent of lavender soothed her nerves, and she allowed herself a rare moment of self-indulgence. Her thoughts wandered to the day's investments, to the next board meeting, to the new landscaping project in her gardens. The image of the twins, if for an instant it dared to surface, was quickly swept away by a wave of selfish satisfaction. She had acted with practicality, as she liked to think. She had removed a problem, secured her peace and her inheritance. The outside world, with its miseries and dramas, did not touch her. She saw herself as a queen in her castle, unattainable, untouchable. Upon leaving the bath, she put on a silk robe and sat at her dressing table, admiring her reflection. Her eyes, though aged, still carried a gleam of determination and a calculating coldness. There was no regret, only the certainty of having done what she considered right for herself. Back in the forest, the guardian of shadows made a decision. He could not stand still. The protective instinct was stronger than the fear of the unknown. Gently, he picked up the basket with the twins in his mouth, holding it with the same delicate softness a mother bear would carry her cubs. His sharp teeth, capable of tearing apart, were now instruments of unimaginable care. He began to move, no longer in circles, but in a specific direction, towards the edge of the forest, where the smell of smoke and at times the sound of human voices reached him on the wind. He knew that the proximity of humans was dangerous, but the urgency of the little ones' lives superseded any apprehension. Each step was calculated, each movement a silent promise that he would not abandon them. The twins, gently swaying in the basket, felt the warmth of the tiger's body and, for a moment, the crying subsided to a murmur, as if trusting that unlikely guardian. The forest, which once seemed an endless labyrinth, now slowly opened up, revealing less dense trails, traces of human presence. The tiger, with his white coat almost invisible among the sunbeams filtering through the trees, advanced with fierce determination. He sought neither prey nor shelter. He sought salvation for those two tiny lives. With each meter traveled, the distance between Ilara's cruelty and the tiger's altruism grew, weaving a narrative where the purest love blossomed in the most unexpected places, defying human logic and coldness. Nature, with its ancient wisdom, was orchestrating an encounter, a destiny Ilara could never control, proving that life, even the most fragile, has an indomitable strength, capable of moving mountains and hearts, even the wildest ones. The distant sound of a stream, and perhaps something more, began to make itself intensely present. The guardian of shadows smelled wood smoke and heard the murmur of human voices more clearly now, mixed with the sound of the stream. His muscles tense, every hair of his white coat bristling with the ancestral caution of his species. The border between his wild world and that of humans was dangerous, but the faint and intermittent crying of the twins in the basket in his mouth was a constant reminder of the urgency. He could not fail. With long, silent strides, he emerged from the density of the forest, finding himself at the edge of a clearing where a small wooden cabin with a chimney emitting smoke nestled under the shade of an old oak. The cabin seemed a point of light and warmth amidst the cold vastness of the woods. From within came the smell of fresh bread and herbs, and a soft voice, almost a lullaby. It was a woman's voice. The tiger hesitated, his electric blue eyes fixed on the cabin door. He could simply leave the basket there and retreat to the safety of the forest. But something prevented him. The fragility of the babies, the cold that intensified with the morning breeze, the certainty that hunger would consume them. He needed more than an abandonment. He needed a handover. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, Mrs. Ilara was in her private beauty salon, enjoying a relaxing massage. Her eyes were closed, and an almost imperceptible smile played on her thin lips. The absence of any concern for the twins was a balm for her hardened soul. She imagined that by this hour, nature would have fulfilled its role, and the little nuisances would have become part of the forest's merciless cycle. What a relief, she thought, as the masseuse applied expensive oils to her aged skin. Her plans for the day included a visit to the stock exchange and a lunch with influential investors. Her life, she believed, was finally back on the tracks she herself had laid, free from any sentimental interference. Back in the clearing, the guardian of shadows took a step forward, then another. The twins' crying, which had subsided for a brief moment of exhaustion, resumed with renewed vigor. A desperate cry for food and warmth. The woman inside the cabin stopped singing. A sudden tense silence hung in the air. The tiger, sensing the proximity of discovery, gently lowered the basket to the ground, right in front of the wooden door. His eyes fixed on the doorknob, as if he could, with the force of his will, make it open. The door creaked open, and a white-haired lady with kind eyes, dressed in a floral apron, appeared on the threshold. It was Mrs. Aurora, known in the region for her kindness and for living in harmony with the forest. Her eyes widened upon seeing the basket, and then, looking up, she met the electric blue eyes of the albino tiger, standing a few meters away. There was no fear on her face, only a deep surprise and a silent understanding. The guardian of shadows, in a gesture of trust and desperation, bowed his head slightly as if pleading. Mrs. Aurora, her heart pounding but without a trace of fear, approached the basket. The tiger remained motionless, observing her every move. Upon seeing the two babies huddled, crying and trembling from the cold, a wave of compassion flooded Mrs. Aurora. She carefully picked them up, cradling them in her arms. Their small red faces, their little mouths open in search of food, touched her soul. She looked at the tiger, who now, his mission accomplished, began to retreat slowly into the shadow of the trees, his eyes still fixed on the babies. With the twins safe in her arms, Mrs. Aurora hurriedly entered the cabin, closing the door softly. The warmth of the fire in the hearth and the smell of homemade food welcomed the little ones. She began to warm milk, her thoughts confused, but her heart filled with immense gratitude. Outside, the guardian of shadows watched from afar, hidden among the trees. He felt a deep relief, a peace he had never before experienced. The twins were safe. The forest had acted, but not as Ilara expected. Love and compassion had found a way, proving that life, in its most vulnerable form, always finds a guardian, even if it's an improbable albino tiger, and that kindness can flourish where it's least expected. The twins' story, far from over, was beginning to unfold in a new and promising chapter. Inside the cozy cabin, Mrs. Aurora felt the warmth of the small bodies against hers. With experienced hands, she prepared a bottle with warm milk, testing the temperature on her wrist. Her gentle eyes fixed on the babies' red, wrinkled little faces. One of them, the more agitated, greedily grasped the nipple, sucking strongly, while the other waited patiently, their light blue eyes already open, observing the new world. Mrs. Aurora fed them alternately, feeling a wave of tenderness wash over her chest. It was a forgotten but deeply rooted feeling of care and protection. She changed them, cleaning them with soft, warm cloths, and nestled them in a wicker basket lined with blankets she used to store wool. The crying ceased, replaced by sighs of satisfaction, and finally, peaceful sleep. Outside, the guardian of shadows remained on the lookout, his electric blue eyes fixed on the cabin. He smelled milk and human warmth, a scent now associated with the safety of the cubs he had saved. A strange sense of duty fulfilled, but also of a connection that would not easily break, filled his wild being. He lay down on the damp leaves, his massive body camouflaged by the morning mist, ready to intervene if any danger threatened the twins' new home. His presence was a silent link, a promise of constant vigilance. Meanwhile, in her grand mansion, Mrs. Ilara was preparing for a day of commitments. She wore an elegant silk suit, choosing discreet but valuable jewelry. In her office, she reviewed financial reports, her demeanor serious and focused. A cold smile appeared on her lips as she saw the growing profits from her investments. "Perfect," she murmured to herself, feeling in absolute control of her life and destiny. The image of the twins had completely disappeared from her mind, replaced by numbers and strategies. She missed nothing, nor anyone. Her loneliness was a choice, a shield against the vulnerabilities she so despised. The world, for Ilara, was an arena where only the strong and the cunning survived, and she considered herself the most cunning of all. Her agenda was filled with meetings and business dinners, each carefully planned to strengthen her position and increase her fortune. Compassion was an emotion she had long since extirpated from her heart, seeing it as a sign of weakness. Back in the cabin, Mrs. Aurora watched the twins sleeping, their little chests rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. The mystery of their arrival weighed on her mind, but the joy of having them there was much greater. Who would have abandoned them? And why did the majestic tiger bring them to her door? She knew that life in the forest was harsh, but also full of miracles. She caressed one of the baby's cheeks, feeling the softness of their skin. Her heart, once accustomed to the quietude of old age, now pulsed with a new purpose, a new responsibility. She knew she would not be alone on this journey, for the guardian of shadows, the unlikely guardian angel, was still out there, protecting them. The forest, with its secrets and ancient wisdom, had delivered to her not a burden, but a precious gift. A reminder that love and life always find a way, even in the most improbable circumstances. Mrs. Aurora felt the weight of responsibility, but also immense joy. Those small beings, so fragile and innocent, had come into her life in such an extraordinary way. She watched them, the wrinkles on her face softening into a tender, maternal smile. But the quietude of the moment could not erase the questions pounding in her mind. Who were they? Where did they come from? And more importantly, how could she ensure they would have everything they needed, beyond the warmth of her cabin and the milk she could offer? The forest was a home for her, yes, but not for human babies without a family. She needed to act, not only for them, but for the justice her simple good heart urgently cried out for. With a deep sigh, Mrs. Aurora made her decision. She could not keep them hidden, nor could she ignore the pressing need to seek help and perhaps find answers about their origin. It was a risk, yes, to leave the reclusion she so loved, but the lives of those children were worth any effort and sacrifice. She arranged the basket again, with extreme care, placing the sleeping babies inside, covering them with a thicker, softer blanket. Outside, the guardian of shadows noticed the change in the cabin's energy. His ears twitched, catching the subtle sound of Mrs. Aurora's movements. He stood up, his electric blue eyes fixed on the wooden door. He sensed that something was about to happen, a new stage in the journey he had begun, with the delivery of the cubs. His protective instinct, sharpened by recent experience, alerted him to the need for heightened vigilance. He did not know where the woman would go, but he knew, with the certainty of his wild being, that he would not leave her alone with the little cubs. Mrs. Ilara, oblivious to any turn of events unfolding in the forest, was in her company's boardroom, presiding over a heated discussion about new investments and market strategies. Her eyes scanned the charts and numbers with a calculating and ruthless coldness. She interrupted one of the directors with an impatient wave of her hand. "Don't come to me with empty sentimentalities, gentlemen. Profit is profit. The rest is mere distraction." Her voice, though calm, carried the unquestionable authority of one who tolerated no questioning or weakness. She felt an unshakable power, the certainty that she had built her empire with astute intelligence and without moral concessions. The idea that her past could come to light was as remote as a flower blooming in the desert of her hardened heart. She had erased the twins from her history, and so it would remain forever, she believed. Back in the clearing, Mrs. Aurora opened the cabin door, the basket carefully balanced in one arm. The morning sun was already higher, and the mist began to dissipate, revealing the winding trail that led to the nearest small village, a few hours' walk away. She looked at the forest, at the place where the albino tiger usually hid. "Are you coming with us, my friend?" she murmured, as if he could understand her words. And indeed, the guardian of shadows emerged from the shadows, not with the ferocity of a predator, but with the majestic stillness of a guardian. He positioned himself a few steps behind her, his eyes fixed on the basket, his muscles ready for any threat that might arise. Mrs. Aurora felt a wave of courage and determination. With the tiger as her silent protector and the twins as her precious cargo, she took the first firm step towards the village. This would be the turning point, the crucial moment when the truth, however painful for some, would begin to unravel. Mrs. Aurora's innate kindness and the surprising loyalty of the guardian of shadows were about to shed light on the darkness of Ilara's wicked deeds, and the world soon would know of the twins' existence and the miracle of their survival. The journey would be long and full of challenges, but love and hope were her most reliable compasses. Mrs. Aurora, with the basket in one arm and the guardian of shadows following her, began her walk. The trail, which was familiar to her, now seemed longer and steeper, the weight of responsibility adding to the physical weight of the little ones. Her steps were slow but firm, each one driven by a force that came from newfound love. The sun, which once promised warmth, filtered through the leaves, creating a play of light and shadow that made the forest a place of beauty and mysteries. She felt the weariness in her bones, but the image of the sleeping little faces in the basket renewed her energy. The tiger, with his silent and imposing presence, was an unexpected comfort. He did not leave her alone, his electric blue eyes scanning the woods, ensuring that no danger approached her precious cargo. Far away, in the opulence of her mansion, Mrs. Ilara was enjoying an exquisite lunch with businessmen. The clinking sound of silver cutlery and the hum of conversations about investments filled the dining room. She smiled, a polished and calculating smile, as she discussed expansion plans for her businesses. Her thoughts were focused on the future, on the consolidation of her financial empire. The memory of the twins, if it ever existed significantly, was buried under layers of ambition and indifference. She felt victorious, relieved of a burden that, in her distorted view, threatened her peace and her fortune. Life for her was a sequence of material conquests, and any emotional deviation was seen as an unacceptable weakness. As Mrs. Aurora approached the village, the sounds of civilization began to intensify. The distant bark of a dog, the laughter of children playing, the smell of fireplace smoke mixed with the scent of wildflowers. Her heart pounded harder, a mix of apprehension and hope. She knew that the arrival would be a shock to the villagers, especially with the guardian of shadows accompanying her. Finally, the trail opened onto the main square of the small village of Aguas Claras. The first people to see her stopped, their eyes wide with astonishment. It was not just the sight of an elderly lady carrying a basket with babies, but the majestic figure of the albino tiger who walked with an almost unreal dignity that caused an absolute silence. The initial buzz gave way to a tense silence, followed by murmurs of fear and disbelief. Children ran to hide behind their parents, and some braver men began to arm themselves with what they had at hand: rakes, pieces of wood. The tiger, sensing the hostility, let out a low, guttural growl, a warning that made the crowd retreat further. Mrs. Aurora, feeling the tension in the air, raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "Don't be afraid." Her voice, though a little shaky, echoed with authority. "This is the guardian of shadows, and he will not harm us. He brought me these babies, abandoned in the forest. They need help." She opened the blanket, revealing the sleeping little faces of the twins, who, fortunately, were still deeply asleep. Oblivious to the unfolding drama, the sight of the babies, so small and vulnerable, began to break through the barrier of fear. An older woman with a scarf on her head and a maternal gaze stepped forward. It was Mrs. Lucia, the village midwife, known for her kindness and wisdom. Her eyes fixed on the twins, and an expression of deep compassion replaced the fear. "Poor little ones," she exclaimed, approaching Mrs. Aurora. "Who would do such a cruel thing?" The tiger, observing Mrs. Lucia, remained motionless, but his growls ceased, as if recognizing the woman's benign intention. Other women began to approach, their faces showing concern. The tiger's presence was still an obstacle, a reminder of the wild nature they feared, but the urgency of the baby's situation spoke louder. Mrs. Aurora felt immense relief, a thread of hope igniting amidst the distrust. Mrs. Lucia reached out to touch one of the babies, but hesitated, looking at the guardian of shadows. "And the tiger?" she asked, her voice low. Mrs. Aurora smiled gently. "He is their protector. He saved them from the cold night and brought them to me. He is a guardian." The explanation seemed absurd, but the seriousness in Mrs. Aurora's eyes and the stillness of the tiger, which showed no aggression, began to convince some. The challenge now was not only to care for the babies, but also to integrate the extraordinary story of their salvation into a community that lived between fear and reverence for the forest. The truth about the abandonment and the improbable salvation was beginning to spread, weaving a new and complex tapestry of events that would inevitably reach Ilara's ears, marking the beginning of her downfall. Mrs. Lucia, with her life experience and a heart accustomed to fragility, was not fazed by the guardian of shadows. Her eyes fixed on the babies, and a sigh of pain escaped. "Who would do something so cruel?" she murmured, her voice choked. She extended her hands to Mrs. Aurora, a gesture of solidarity that broke through the crowd's fear. Mothers and grandmothers felt empathy approaching. The guardian of shadows watched calmly, his electric blue eyes assessing without hostility. He seemed to understand that the threat had diminished. Mrs. Aurora, feeling Mrs. Lucia's support, emphasized, "He is a guardian. He brought them to me, to my cabin, and protected them. The forest, which seemed dangerous, was their refuge." Her sincere words dispelled the skepticism. The men lowered their rakes, their gazes divided between the tiger and the twins' vulnerability. A young mother with a baby in her arms approached, her eyes teary. "Are they hungry, Mrs. Aurora? Do they need warmth?" Genuine concern replaced fear, weaving solidarity. The village of Aguas Claras would embrace a story that defied logic. Mrs. Lucia, taking the lead, indicated, "Let's take them to my house, Mrs. Aurora. There we'll have warm milk and clean blankets. We need to examine them." She gestured for Mrs. Aurora to follow her, and the procession moved. The guardian of shadows, maintaining a respectful distance, followed them, silent steps echoing the promise of protection. The village children, initially scared, now watched the white feline with fascination. The news of the twins' miracle and their wild guardian spread like a whisper, reaching every corner of the village. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, Mrs. Ilara was celebrating another financial victory. In her luxurious office, she toasted with expensive champagne, her eyes shining with the satisfaction of power. Another step to consolidate my empire, she told her assistant. The image of the twins, if it crossed her mind, was swept away by thoughts of profit. She was immersed in numbers and strategies, where compassion was an empty word, and vulnerability, weakness. Her heart, petrified by greed, felt no remorse. Life followed its course, exactly as she had planned. At Mrs. Lucia's house, the twins were carefully examined. They were thin and pale, but surprisingly healthy. Mrs. Lucia cradled them, her experienced fingers checking every detail. "They are strong, despite everything," she commented, a tender smile. Mrs. Aurora, sitting beside her, felt her heart lighter, but the questions persisted. "We need to find their parents," Mrs. Lucia said, her voice serious. "Someone must be looking for them. Or, if they were abandoned, the truth needs to come to light." Involving the authorities was daunting, but necessary. Justice demanded investigating the baby's origin. Outside, the guardian of shadows settled under the shade of a tree near Mrs. Lucia's house. He did not stray, his presence a constant reminder that his mission was not over. The villagers, though cautious, grew accustomed to the sight of the majestic tiger. The story of the twins and their wild guardian was a miracle that Aguas Claras would never forget. It was the beginning of a new era, where kindness and courage united to unravel a dark truth and secure a future for two innocent lives. Every thread of this web would extend to Elara, bringing to light the darkness of her deeds. The guardian of shadows was the bridge between worlds, united by the purest of loves. Mrs. Lucia's suggestion to involve the authorities hung in the air of the small room, thick like the morning mist that still clung stubbornly to the village rooftops. Mrs. Aurora felt a shiver, not of fear, but of apprehension. Her entire life had been one of reclusion, of peace in nature. The idea of bureaucracy, of questions, and of having to expose the twins' extraordinary story to strangers was daunting. She clasped her wrinkled hands, looking at the babies who slept peacefully in the improvised basket. "The authorities, Mrs. Lucia," she murmured, her voice a mere thread. Couldn't we just take care of them here?" Mrs. Lucia, with the wisdom of one who had seen much of life, placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Aurora's shoulder. "My dear, your heart is big, and so is mine. But these children deserve more than we can give, however much we love them. They deserve to know who they are, and whoever did this to them needs to be held accountable. Justice at times is an arduous path, but it is the right path for the innocent." Her eyes, full of compassion, conveyed an unwavering firmness. "It is our duty, Mrs. Aurora, for them." Mrs. Aurora took a deep breath, feeling the weight of truth in Mrs. Lucia's words. The altruism which had driven her out of the forest now demanded an even greater step. She nodded slowly, the decision ripening in her chest. "Then we will do whatever it takes. For them." Outside, the news of Mrs. Aurora's arrival with the twins and the albino tiger had already spread throughout the village. The villagers, once divided between fear and curiosity, now gathered in front of Mrs. Lucia's house, their murmurs transforming into a wave of support. The story of the Guardian of Shadows, which seemed straight out of an ancient tale, was beginning to be accepted as a miracle. The children, bolder, peered at the majestic white feline who remained lying under the tree like a living statue, his electric blue eyes fixed on the house. He was the silent link, the irrefutable proof of a protection that defied reason. Mrs. Lucia sent her eldest grandson, a good-hearted young man named Pedro, to the neighboring town to call the chief of police. The wait was long, filled with neighbors bringing blankets, baby clothes, and food, a testament to the solidarity blossoming in Aguas Claras. Mrs. Aurora moved, felt the strength of the community embracing the little ones. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, Mrs. Ilara was at her private golf club, enjoying a sunny afternoon and a perfect game. Her club hit the ball with precision, sending it far towards the hole. A smile of satisfaction, cold and calculating, adorned her lips. Another point for me, gentlemen. Life is a game of strategy, and I always win. She sipped her champagne, feeling invincible. The memory of the twins, if for a second it crossed her mind, was quickly swept away by the euphoria of victory and the certainty that she had rid herself of any inconvenience. Her heart, shielded by greed, did not allow the shadow of the past to reach her. As dusk fell, Pedro returned, accompanied by a man of serious demeanor but kind eyes, Chief Almeida. He was known for his integrity and patience. Upon seeing the crowd, and especially the albino tiger lying peacefully, his expression became a mix of surprise and caution. Mrs. Lucia received him at the door, and Mrs. Aurora, with the sleeping twins in her arms, waited inside the house. Chief Almeida listened to the story attentively, his eyes scanning Mrs. Aurora and the babies, then turning to the window, where the guardian of shadows was an undeniable presence. "An extraordinary story, Mrs. Aurora," he said, his voice grave. "We need to investigate this thoroughly. Find the parents or whoever abandoned them. Justice will be served." Mrs. Aurora felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The path would be long, but hope, driven by Mrs. Lucia's kindness and the guardian of shadows' loyalty, was the flame that would guide her. Chief Almeida promised to begin investigations immediately, and the village of Aguas Claras, united by compassion, was ready to support Mrs. Aurora every step of the way. The truth, like an overflowing river, was beginning to find its way, inevitably, towards Mrs. Ilara's mansion, to unmask the darkness of her deeds. Chief Almeida, a man of principles, did not delay in acting. The next morning he returned to Mrs. Lucia's house, bringing with him a notebook and a pen, ready to document every detail of the extraordinary story. Mrs. Aurora, though tired, was ready to cooperate, her eyes fixed on the twins who slept in an improvised crib. Mrs. Lucia, with her usual calm, offered hot coffee and biscuits, creating an atmosphere of trust. "Mrs. Aurora, I need you to tell me everything. From the moment you found the babies," the chief asked, his voice soft but firm. Mrs. Aurora, with slow and deliberate gestures, narrated her experience in the forest, the cold night, the babies' cries, and the majestic arrival of the guardian of shadows. She described how the tiger protected them as if he were a mother, and how he guided her to the cabin. Chief Almeida listened attentively, taking notes, but his eyes showed a hint of disbelief when the tiger was mentioned. "And the tiger, is he still around?" he asked, trying to disguise his surprise. "Yes, Chief. He's out there under the tree. He doesn't stray from the babies," Mrs. Lucia replied, confirming the most unbelievable part of the story. The chief went to the window, and indeed, there was the guardian of shadows, an imposing and serene figure, his electric blue eyes fixed on the house. He sighed. This complicated things. How would he explain an albino tiger guarding babies in his official report? The news of the twins' miracle and their wild protector soon transcended the borders of Aguas Claras. The villagers, who initially feared, now told the story with a mix of pride and admiration. Travelers passing through the village carried the accounts to neighboring towns, and soon the story of the forest twins and the white tiger began to appear in small local newspapers, in columns of curiosities and regional legends. The simplicity and purity of the story touched people's hearts, awakening a wave of compassion and a desire to help. Donations of clothes, food, and even toys began to arrive in the village, a testament to human kindness. While hope and solidarity blossomed in Aguas Claras, Mrs. Ilara continued her life of luxury and power, completely oblivious to the buzz that was forming. She was on a private flight to a paradise island in the Caribbean, where she planned to close a large real estate deal. In her first-class seat, she leafed through a finance magazine, her thoughts focused exclusively on profits and expansion. The smile on her lips was one of pure satisfaction, the certainty that she had orchestrated her life with mastery, eliminating any trace of weakness or unwanted responsibility. One of the articles in the magazine, on a secondary page, spoke about urban legends and inspiring stories of overcoming adversity, and a small paragraph mentioned, almost in passing, the strange case of babies found in the forest, protected by a wild animal in a small inland village. Ilara read the sentence without paying attention, her gaze merely gliding over the words. To her, it was just another foolish story, irrelevant to her world of figures and power. She turned the page impatient, in search of something that truly mattered. The idea that this news could have any connection to her dark past was absurd, unthinkable. Her heart, long since petrified, felt not the slightest pang of curiosity or remorse. She was safe in her bubble of indifference, believing that time had erased all her tracks. But the river of truth, though slow, was already on its way, and its relentless waters would, inevitably, reach the foundations of her empire. Ilara, still on her private flight, closed the magazine with a dry snap, boredom etched on her perfect face. The small mention of the forest babies was already forgotten, swept away by thoughts of million-dollar contracts and the warm Caribbean breeze awaiting her. She smiled to herself, a smile of self-sufficiency. Nothing could shake her world. Meanwhile, in Aguas Claras, Chief Almeida's investigation was taking on more serious contours. He had returned to the neighboring town and, with the help of Pedro, Mrs. Lucia's grandson, began to research recent birth records and disappearances. The story of the twins and the guardian of shadows, told with passion by Mrs. Aurora and confirmed by the villagers, had touched the chief's heart, despite his pragmatic mind struggling to accept the part about the tiger. He knew that the cruelty of the abandonment demanded an answer, and the uniqueness of the case attracted attention. The news, which was once a whisper in local newspapers, began to gain a voice. A reporter from a major regional newspaper, intrigued by the legend of the guardian white tiger, decided to go to Aguas Claras. He heard Mrs. Aurora's accounts, saw Mrs. Lucia's devotion, and with his own eyes witnessed the majestic and protective presence of the guardian of shadows, who remained faithful under the tree in front of the midwife's house. The article he wrote, detailed and moving, was published prominently on the front page, accompanied by a poignant photograph of the sleeping twins and, in the background, the imposing silhouette of the tiger. The title was impactful: The Miracle of the Forest Twins, saved by a wild guardian, abandoned by a cruel heart. This article, with its increased visibility, began to circulate throughout the state and soon throughout the country. The story moved the nation, generating a wave of indignation against the abandonment and admiration for Mrs. Aurora's courage and the tiger's loyalty. In a matter of days, the image of the twins and the guardian of shadows was in all news reports, television programs, and on social media. It was at her luxurious resort in the Caribbean that Mrs. Ilara, days later, felt the first tremor in her empire of indifference. She was at breakfast, leafing through an international newspaper delivered to her daily. Her eyes, accustomed to seeking news of economy and politics, stopped abruptly at a headline in the unusual world news section. Mystery in Brazil: babies abandoned in forest and protected by albino tiger shock the country. The photo below the headline was unmistakable. The two babies, with their delicate little faces, and in the background, the unmistakable figure of the guardian of shadows. Blood ran cold in Ilara's veins. That foolish story she had ignored on the plane. It was hers. Her champagne, which once seemed so tasty, now had a bitter and metallic taste. Her hands, which held the newspaper firmly, began to tremble. She read every word, her breath caught in her throat, the details of the forest, the description of the babies, the mention of Mrs. Aurora and the village of Aguas Claras. Everything fit into a macabre puzzle she thought she had buried forever. The article spoke about the ongoing police investigation, about the search for the biological parents, and, more importantly, about the unspeakable cruelty of the abandonment. Ilara's calculating smile vanished, replaced by a mask of horror and cold fury. It was not possible. How had that come out of the forest, out of the darkness she had so carefully planned? How had nature, which she expected to be complicit in her perverse act, betrayed her plans with such audacity? Her heart, once petrified and impenetrable, felt a sharp pang, not of remorse, but of a cold and paralyzing fear that crept up her spine. The invincibility she so cherished crumbled before her eyes. The game of strategy she believed she mastered was drastically turning against her. The truth, relentless and fierce as the guardian of shadows himself, had finally reached her, not as a distant whisper, but as a deafening roar that echoed in her soul, marking the irremediable beginning of her downfall. The deafening roar of truth echoed in Ilara's soul, not just as a sound, but as a vibration that destabilized every fiber of her being. The newspaper slipped from her trembling hands, falling onto the marble table with a dull thud that seemed amplified in her mind. The champagne, once a symbol of her victory, now seemed like a bubbling poison. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair, her eyes wide, fixed on the blue Caribbean horizon, which suddenly seemed like an abyss. The bubble of indifference which she had built with such care had burst, and the cold air of reality suffocated her. "No, it's not possible," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. The image of the albino tiger, protector of the twins, danced in her mind like a ghost. How had nature, which she believed she had manipulated for her cruel ends, turned against her with such ferocity? Her fear was not for remorse, but for the loss of control, for the exposure of her impeccable image, for the downfall of her empire of lies. She picked up the phone, her hands still trembling, and called her lawyer, her voice now a cutting thread of steel despite the panic. "I need you to fix this, now, no matter the cost." While Ilara desperately tried to contain the inevitable, in Aguas Claras, the twins' lives blossomed under the warmth of compassion. Mrs. Lucia's house had become a center of support, with neighbors taking turns to help Mrs. Aurora care for the babies. They had been given provisional names, chosen by the community, Luan and Luna, in homage to the light they brought and the moon that had protected them in the forest. Chief Almeida, with the newspaper article in hand, felt the urgency of the case. Public pressure was immense, and the story of the twins and their wild guardian had mobilized the country. Investigations advanced rapidly, with the help of accounts from travelers who had seen a wealthy and distant woman in the region shortly before the abandonment. Ilara's description, her haughty demeanor and her luxury car, began to emerge in testimonies. The chief, with his patience and integrity, wove the web of truth. He knew that justice at times was slow but relentless. Mrs. Lucia and Mrs. Aurora, sitting beside the crib where Luan and Luna slept, felt a deep peace. The community had embraced the babies as children of Aguas Claras, and solidarity was a balm for their souls. The guardian of shadows, faithful as always, remained under the tree, his electric blue eyes observing the house with a protective calm. He was the living symbol that love and protection could emerge from the most unexpected places, defying human cruelty. The news of Mrs. Ilara's involvement came as a shock to Mrs. Aurora, but it did not surprise her. The evil that had abandoned the babies could only come from such a cold heart. Chief Almeida, after weeks of investigation, had irrefutable evidence. Ilara's fortune could not buy the silence of the press, nor erase the evidence. She was formally accused of child abandonment, and the repercussion was devastating. Her name, once a synonym for power and success, was now associated with cruelty and inhumanity. Her businesses began to crumble, her partners abandoned her, and the society she so cherished condemned her. Ilara's moral and legal downfall was complete, a testament that truth always finds a way, even in the wildest clutches. Luan and Luna, meanwhile, grew strong and loved, the living proof that good always prevails. For Mrs. Ilara, the world she had built with such coldness and calculation crumbled into ruins. Her lawyers, once so efficient, could not contain the avalanche of evidence and the fury of public opinion. Society, which once revered her for her fortune, now viewed her with contempt. Her investments evaporated, her friends disappeared, and the luxurious mansion became a silent prison, echoing only the emptiness of her own soul. She saw herself alone, not by choice, but by consequence, the mirror of her life reflecting an image of isolation and bitterness. There were no tears of regret, only the impotent fury of one who had lost control. Her eyes, once bright with the flame of ambition, now carried the weight of an overwhelming defeat, a punishment she never imagined possible. The greed and bitterness that had poisoned her for so long finally consumed her from within. In Aguas Claras, life pulsed with a different energy. Luan and Luna, now a few years old, ran through the flowery fields, their crystalline laughter filling the air. They were the joy of the village, the personification of hope. Mrs. Aurora, with a serene smile on her face, watched them play, her white hair fluttering in the wind. Mrs. Lucia, with her wisdom and affection, was a grandmother to them, teaching them ancient songs and stories of the forest. The entire community had embraced them, each neighbor offering a piece of their heart. Luan, with his innate curiosity, loved to explore, while Luna, calmer, liked to draw with sticks in the dirt. The guardian of shadows, majestic and vigilant, never abandoned them. He became a living legend, a symbol of unconditional protection. The village children, who once feared him, now saw him as a giant friend, respecting his strength and his presence. He watched them closely, lying under his usual tree, his electric blue eyes following every movement of the twins. It was an invisible yet unbreakable bond between wild nature and the purest humanity. The story of Luan and Luna, of their abandonment and miraculous salvation, became a beacon of hope. It inspired people to look at others with more compassion, to value family, and to believe that even in the darkest adversities, good always finds a way. Justice, though late for Ilara, brought a sense of reparation, showing that no one is above the laws of the heart and society. The twins, growing up in a home filled with love, with Mrs. Aurora and Mrs. Lucia as their mothers and grandmothers respectively, and the entire village as their large family, had the chance for a full life. They learned about altruism, about the strength of human connection, and about the beauty of the nature that once embraced them. The forest, which Mrs. Ilara had chosen as a tomb, became the cradle of new life, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the compassion that transcends species. The guardian of shadows, the albino tiger, was the living proof that the purest and most selfless love can blossom in the most unexpected places, transforming darkness into light. The story of Aguas Claras, of the twins and their wild protector, would be told for generations, an eternal reminder that kindness is the greatest force, capable of healing wounds, uniting hearts, and ensuring that the light of hope never fades. Years passed, and the small village, once an almost invisible dot on the map, flourished under the light of this extraordinary narrative. Luan and Luna, now young adults, were the living proof of the miracle. Luan, with the same curiosity that drove him in childhood, dedicated himself to the study of biology and conservation, dreaming of protecting the nature that once embraced him. His eyes, which inherited the gleam of hope, observed the guardian of shadows with a reverence that transcended respect. Luna, in turn, found her passion in the arts, painting canvases that captured the wild beauty of the forest and the serenity of the albino tiger, her canvases vibrating with the colors of gratitude and resilience. Mrs. Aurora, with the wisdom of years and a heart overflowing with love, saw in the twins the realization of her purest dreams. Her house, which had once been a refuge, was now a home filled with laughter, stories told by lamplight, and the smell of fresh coffee. Mrs. Lucia, with her soft voice and hands that still prepared the best biscuits in the village, was the matriarch, the guardian of memories, always ready to recount the saga of the guardian with details that made the eyes of the youngest sparkle. The community of Aguas Claras, united as never before, transformed into an example of altruism. Volunteers from all over the country came to visit the village to help with environmental preservation projects and to hear firsthand the legend of the tiger who became a guardian. The guardian of shadows, with his immaculate white coat and deep blue eyes, remained a constant presence. He aged with the dignity of a king, his movements slower, but his vigilance unshakable. Luan and Luna, who learned to communicate with him through gestures and glances, felt a deep, almost mystical connection. They knew he was more than an animal. He was the soul of the forest, the symbol of the unconditional love that had saved them. Often at dusk, the twins would sit near him, sharing the silence and wisdom that only nature can offer. Meanwhile, far away, Mrs. Ilara lived her final years in self-imposed isolation, her fortune reduced to mere memories of a power that had faded. The mansion, once the stage for sumptuous parties, was now a mausoleum of unspoken regrets. Her eyes, once full of greed, reflected only the emptiness of a soul that never knew how to love. She felt no remorse, but the bitterness of having lost everything she valued: control, reputation, adulation. Justice for her did not come in the form of imprisonment, but in overwhelming loneliness, in the loss of everything that, in her distorted mind, defined her existence. Her name, once synonymous with power, was now whispered as a warning, a story of how cruelty can consume those who practice it. Luan and Luna, on the other hand, built their lives on the pillars of gratitude and purpose. They founded an organization dedicated to the protection of vulnerable children and wildlife conservation, naming it Guardians of Hope. Their voices, once mere cries in the forest, became a powerful chorus that inspired thousands. They traveled telling their story, not with bitterness for the past, but with the conviction that every life matters and that kindness is the seed of a better future. The forest, which Ilara expected to be a tomb, became the cradle of a legend, an eternal echo of love that transcends barriers and hope that never fades. The story of Luan and Luna, of the Guardians of Hope, and of the majestic albino tiger would continue to be told, not just as a tale, but as a guide for a world where compassion always finds its way, and where the human heart, even in its fragility, can be the greatest force of transformation.